Well, good morning, or good afternoon. Today's the winter solstice, shortest day of the year here in Australia and in the States. It'll be the longest. If I was going to give a title to today's talk, it would be Making the Teachings Our Own. And I have a couple of koans I'd like to talk about in relation to this. So when we start off, we're kind of hearing the teachings and we're feeling like a beginner, maybe feeling a bit clumsy or something like that. But over time, we start to feel a little more like, oh, I do agree with this. This seems right. Seems kind of right. And we hear the words initially, and we're not quite sure what they mean, but they sound kind of like they could be true, or they seem beneficial. But after a while, when we keep on examining them in our own day-to-day life and we contemplate them, they start turning into our own words. They start to be our own thoughts. We have the thought, even though we've heard the actual words before, we have the thought as our own thought. And then it becomes our thought. We think everything is interdependent. Or we think, I don't think I really exist as an independent person. Or one that I often just use a lot is like, practice works. I probably heard teachers say that, I can't remember, but at a certain point, I started saying in my head, oh my God, practice works. Like as my thought, or the only thing there is now as my own thought. Sure, I'd heard it many, many times by many different teachers and read it. But as our practice goes along, that's what starts to happen. And that's my wish for everyone who practices, that the teachings become their own. And then you don't have to try and remember them or anything. They're the sort of fibres of your body, and they're the lens through which you see the world. And I've seen how teachers, when they first get authorised to teach, they kind of feel like, oh my gosh, can I do this? You know, they feel so kind of young and raw. And then, like in no time at all, suddenly they're seen as senior teachers, and they kind of like, how did that happen? And we see that too with students. You know, you're a student at school or university, or you're an apprentice, or you're new in a job, and you're being trained. And then after a while, you know, you really get to know what you're doing, and all of a sudden, not so much time, people are asking you about things. How do you do that? Why does that happen? So all of us move from being sort of apprentices in the Dharma to embodiers of the Dharma. It's kind of a beautiful thing, and to really feel that we can be that. We don't have to always be students hearing other teachers talk or reading it and going, I wish I could be like that. We really can take on these teachings as our own. There's a lovely koan that speaks to this point in The Gateless Barrier, the Mumon Khan, Robert Aitken's translation. It's case 39, Yun Men, you have misspoken. A monk said to Yun Men, the radiance serenely illumes the whole universe. Before he had finished the line, Yun Men interrupted him and asked, aren't those the words of Cheng Cho? The monk said, yes, they are. Yun Men said, "You have misspoken." Later, turns out to be 200 years later, the master Su Xin took up this matter and asked, "Tell me, where did the monk misspeak?" So the monk went to Yun Men and started to recite a verse. I'll read out the verse in a minute. But before it even got past the first line, Yun Men interrupted him and asked him who said that. And the monk told him who the author of it was, and then Yun Men says, "You have misspoken." So it's important with these sorts of dialogues not to get caught on so much like what did the monk do wrong, or did the monk do anything wrong, but rather to look at why has this dialogue become part of a koan collection? Why has this dialogue between a monk and Yun Men become something that people study? And what can I learn from it? Like, what is it about? What's it offering me? In what way could he have misspoken? Not as particularly as a criticism so much as how can I see an instruction in him being interrupted partway through reciting something. So I'll read a little bit of the commentary here by Robert Aitken. Each of the greatest teachers is remembered for a particular method. Lin Chi for his shout, Teishan for his stick, Jiao Zhou for his welcoming spirit, and so on. Yun Men is remembered especially for his capacity to teach in the broadest context, cutting off the student's preoccupations and following up appropriately on the student's question or presentation. He realized and practiced the ideal of all Zen masters. So here a monk begins a quotation from the government official Chang Chou, a prominent lay student of Zen in early times. His enlightenment poem runs as follows. The radiance serenely illumes the whole universe. The ignorant, the wise, all beings are in my abode. When no thought rises, the whole is revealed. If the 6 sense organs move even a little, it is obscured by clouds. If you cut off your ignorance, your ailment will increase. If you look for the truth, you are wrong. Living in accord with things of the world, you have no obstructions. Nirvana and life and death are like colours in a dream. So we're going to come back to this, but I'll just continue. The monk was probably going to ask Yun Men a question about this poem. If Yun Men had waited for the question, the dialogue would have been very different. I don't know of other Zen cases where the teacher actually interrupts a student. Usually the questioner is allowed full scope to ask a question or make a presentation, though the rug may be yanked out thereafter, of course. Yun Men's interruption in this case is quite instructive. By the time the monk reached the end of Chang Chou's long poem, he might have been full of pride about his appreciation of the lofty words. Can't let this go on, Yun Men probably thought. Stop right there. That might be, the monk might have ended up being full of pride for his appreciation of the lofty words. Well, I think I like to think about it a little more generously. That he was reciting words that he thought were beautiful but didn't really understand, but liked the feeling of them, just sort of like the overall feeling, and that's not so bad. But Yun Men didn't want to have their time in Dokusan, I imagine this was in Dokusan, didn't want to have their time taken up by hearing that whole long verse. He thought, I'm going to, he did something very kind. It looks kind of sharp and maybe a bit harsh to interrupt, but he's doing it out of kindness to see what the monk will do. So he asked him, who wrote that verse? Or where did that verse come from? And the monk replied, and then he said, "You have misspoken." So of course for us what we want to be able to do is, how can we hear these different lines and then make them our own? So I won't go through this whole long verse because it's really long. But as an example, so we hear the first line. Let's do the first two lines. The radiance serenely illumes the whole universe. Well, even just right there. So when you hear that line, you might think, oh, that sounds very Zen, I like the sound of that. But we can take it and in our own time go, what radiance? What's radiance talking about? The radiance serenely illumes the whole universe. And we can ask ourselves and try and just answer it as best as we can. I don't know, the radiance is maybe like the life force, or radiance is like Buddha nature maybe. You know, we don't have to get it right. It's just, so maybe we can try it on. So let's say the radiance is sort of like life itself. So life serenely illuminates the whole universe. And we might think, yes, but there's life on Earth. I don't know if there's life on other planets, so maybe it's not life. You know, and we can just work like that. And over the years, this process of really authentically, genuinely taking these teachings, hearing a line that resonates with us, and seeing how we can really understand it ourselves. You know, like a good test is when someone asks you a question like, well, what's Zen Buddhism? Or what does the Buddha mean when he said blah, blah, blah? And you have something that you know, you've got to come up with something. Like, what does the Buddha mean that there's no self? Someone might ask you that question. And it's interesting to see where you are in your practice. Like, how do you answer that? You know, that's what we're wanting to do, to have these teachings become our own. And it takes a bit of time. It takes a while. But it's so much more rewarding and satisfying when we can really do that work and we sit zazen so that we can let the teaching sink in. And people are all different, but I think a lot of people are a little similar to me in the sense that sometimes just a tiny bit of a phrase just captures your imagination, and you just sort of let that just roll around in your mind. And you look at things and you hear things, and with that line in mind, it slowly just starts to sink into you. So the second line of that verse is, the ignorant, the wise, all beings are in my abode. That's another line. You could write that down, carry that around with you. Think, what does it mean that the ignorant, the wise, all beings are in my abode? Seems to be saying, like, everything's in my orbit, or can I embrace everything? We can just find our own language. And we could do that with any of the other lines. And there's another koan that speaks to something a little bit similar. It goes like this. It's in the Blue Cliff Record, Case 40. As Lu Ken was talking with Nanchuan, he said, the Dharma Master Zhao said, heaven and earth and I have the same root. The myriad things and I are one. This is quite marvellous. Nanchuan called Lu and pointed to a flower in the garden, saying, people these days see this flower as if they were in a dream. This was a koan that had a big impact on me, and it's when I was a shuso, it's a ceremony that's done for after you've become a priest. You do this ceremony sometimes in bigger sanghas. We're not quite big enough yet, but we'll get there one day. This was the koan that I talked about. And so Lu Ken, and again, it's not to focus on him making a mistake, but he's reciting a beautiful verse and saying, isn't it marvellous? And the teacher's sort of thinking, you're thinking about this verse, and right here is a flower. just right here. Sometimes when we use the word dream, it's used in a positive way of seeing the dream-like quality of things. But in this instance, it's seeing the dream as in sort of seeing it through some kind of veil, so you're not seeing it properly. You're not properly seeing. You're not seeing things sharply and brightly, as they actually are, right there in front of our face. Right there on the ground, this flower. So the teacher instructs him that way. He doesn't get caught up in the beautiful verse. He just points to the flower. Says, some people these days see this flower as if in a dream. And of course, some people these days is a polite way of saying, maybe you only see this flower as a dream because you're preoccupied with sort of a more abstract understanding of the teachings rather than an embodied understanding of the teachings. Yeah. And this is a new book that I just got yesterday. I mean, I don't know if it's not new, but it's new to me. Opening the Door of Your Heart. Buddhist stories that Ajahn Brahm has put together, and he's a forest meditation monk in Ajahn Chah's tradition, and he lives in Perth and has a monastery there. And some in our Sangha have spent time there. I haven't, but some other people in our Sangha have. So I thought I'd just read one of the stories. It's a different way to our Zen way of talking about practice. So it's nice to have a bit of variety. So I'll read this one out. This story is called The Most Beautiful Sound, and it relates to this topic of making the teachings our own. An uneducated old man was visiting a city for the first time in his life. He'd grown up in a remote mountain village, worked hard raising his children, and was now enjoying his first visit to his children's modern homes. One day, while being shown around the city, the old man heard a sound that stung his ears. He had never heard such an awful noise in his quiet mountain village, and he insisted on finding its cause. Following the grating sound back to its source, he came to a room in the back of a house where a small boy was practicing on a violin. Screech, scrape, came the discordant notes from the groaning violin. When he was told by his son that this was called a violin, he decided he never wanted to hear such a horrible thing again. Some people have that reaction when they first hear the Buddha's teachings on suffering. There's suffering, the first noble truth. There's a cause of it. There's a path to the liberation of it. Here's the path, and it sounds arduous. Some people hear the first part of Buddha's teachings a bit like a screeching violin. The next day, in a different part of the city, the old man heard a sound that seemed to caress his aged ears. He'd never heard such an enchanting melody in his mountain valley, so he demanded to find its cause. Following the delightful sound back to its source, he came to a room in front of a house where an old lady, a maestro, was performing a sonata on a violin. At once the old man realized his mistake. The terrible sound that he had heard the previous day was not the fault of the violin, nor even of the boy. It was just that the young man had yet to learn his instrument well. And just to pause there, as we go through the teachings, they start to sound more like a beautiful sonata, a beautiful musical piece. From going something that seems confusing and maybe discordant, it starts to make sense and feel kind of melodious. And it goes on. With a wisdom reserved for the simple folk, the old man thought it was the same with religion. When we come across a religious enthusiast, causing such strife with his beliefs, it is incorrect to blame the religion. It's just that the novice has yet to learn his religion well. When we come across a saint, a maestro of her religion, it is such a sweet encounter that it inspires us for many years, whatever their beliefs. So that was not the end of the story. The third day, in a different part of the city, the old man heard another sound that surpassed in its beauty and purity even that of the maestro on her violin. What do you think that sound was? It was a sound more beautiful than the cascade of a mountain stream in spring, than the autumn wind through the forest groves, or than the mountain birds singing after a heavy rain. It was even more beautiful than the silence in the mountain hollows on a still winter's night. What was the sound that moved the old man's heart more powerfully than anything before? It was a large orchestra playing a symphony. The reason that it was, for the old man, the most beautiful sound in the world was firstly that every member of that orchestra was a maestro of their own instrument, and secondly, that they had further learned how to play together in harmony. May it be the same with religion, the old man thought. Let each one of us learn through the lessons of life the soft heart of our beliefs. Let each be a maestro of the love within their religion. Then, having learned our religion well, let us go further and learn to play like members of an orchestra with other religions in harmony together. That would be the most beautiful sound. So we sort of do that as a Sangha. We're all slowly muddling along, learning our instrument, learning the teachings, learning the practices. We have all these different practices that we do. We do bowing, and incense offering, and chanting, and zazen, of course, being the sort of that embraces all of those other practices. And we work together as a Sangha. We do sesshin, we organise things, we do sewing, we go to a cafe once a month and chat, you know. It's like a great orchestra, and we're all becoming kind of maestros of this instrument of our practice, of Zen practice. So one last thing I'd like to share. We have a koan class that meets every week, and we met this morning, and we have been looking at case 29 of the Blue Cliff Record. In the Book of Serenity. And there's just a couple of lines in that I've loved. It's a dialogue between a governor and a teacher, Feng Shui. And I was commenting that we sometimes think of sort of kings or queens or prime ministers or presidents. Sometimes people think of them not in the nicest way, but actually there are many great leaders, and there have been many, many great leaders. So this is a conversation between a great Zen master and a great leader, a governor. And the governor says, when you do not settle what needs to be settled, instead you bring about disorder. So they've been having this dialogue. And this line has had an impact on me. When you do not settle what needs to be settled, what is it that needs to be settled? What is it that we need to do or understand so that we can be at peace when we go to bed at night, so that we can die contentedly and not have regrets and not think, oh, shoot, I'm about to die. It all went past too fast. What needs to be settled? So yeah, that's like a Dharma thing that you can carry around. You can ask yourself that and answer it. You know, these are the sorts of things that we make the teachings our own. What is it that needs to be settled so that my life is in order? Obviously not just superficially, like your will and things like that, but overall, day by day, moment by moment, what needs to be settled? So I'm going to plug our microphone in so we can have some conversation. And make it so I can... Would anyone online or in the Zender like to comment or ask a question? Hold on.
It's just a very brief comment that it's just ironic that so often the teachings that you present to us on a Saturday morning just are so relevant and ironic that I just listen and think, hang on, that was me in the shower this morning trying to sort through emptiness and interdependent origination, and how am I going to, and there it is. Yeah, that conversation is to be had in the most, just wherever it occurs. So just an observation.
Could you hear that okay online? That's exactly right, Marco. That's exactly right. Particularly, I think it's actually quite good sometimes that the teachings are not so well explained that you think you understand them. I know I've said this quite a few times, but it's really, I think it's quite good that we have a word like emptiness. It's hard to make sense of that word. And that's exactly the place while you're in the shower. It's emptiness. That's exactly the place. And that's exactly what the point I'm trying to make, that's what we need to do as practitioners. Not to take any of it for granted, not to assume that we understand it, to keep on drilling into it until it really starts to feel like, oh, I know what this is about. That's why I'm not too big on trying to simplify it in make it easier, because it kind of, then sometimes it means people don't get the chance to really kind of chew over it at length. It's kind of good that it's a little bit cryptic. It's not cryptic on purpose. It's a little cryptic sounding just because language doesn't reach it. And even that phrase, language doesn't reach it. Do we know what that means? Is that our phrase yet? Can we make that our phrase too? So that we go like, yeah, language can't reach it. And we know what we mean when we say that language can't reach it. Lynn.
Just flowing on from that, the thing that I've been really working with of late is a sense of ritual, because as you know, my mother passed away and I've been doing a lot of ritual practice as part of her transition and letting her go. And it makes me think of how ritual is an embodied practice. When we sit zazen, when I bow to my cushion, when I sit, and how Dogen says it is who sits, who sits, who, and as you're saying, Neti, like who is it that has that? Who is it that has the question or the fascination? And we embody that through sitting practice, through ritual. It changes. It changes me every time I sit. It's not like I have to do anything. It's not a conscious effort. I just show up. And yeah, that's what I want to offer to your Dharma talk.
Thanks, Lynn. Marco.
Just sort of perhaps carrying on from what Lynn just said, I completely agree. It's almost well, it is incremental, but it's also perceptible that you are improving in your practice as every time you sit on that cushion. You know, it may not be every single time that you get up and perceive the benefit, but it's accumulative and it's real, and other people see that as well. Yeah, and that's kind of the feedback, isn't it? Is that you perceive it yourself, but it's other people's attitude to you. It changes, and that's your measure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just add to that too that when things happen in our life that are difficult, or sad, or challenging, or frightening, or whatever they might be, they're opportunities or moments where our practice often deepens and it gets integrated because we navigate that thing, whatever it is. We can tell we're navigating it a little more effectively or skillfully than we would have if we weren't practicing. And that, I think, strengthens our faith that cultivating this kind of broad awareness and broad compassion, cultivating these two things together really is a worthwhile life's work. Scott, we don't often hear from you. Would you like to add any words? I'd like to hear your voice if you're willing to share something.
Sure. I like the realization that you said practice works, because you do realize that as time goes on and you practice more and more. And it feels good to say that, or it feels good when it works. But I have a question. You said if there was a title to your talk, it would be Making the Teachings Your Own. But the what's the difference? This is a question. What's the difference between Buddhist teachings and Buddhist teachings? Because you're using koans, which when did koans become Buddhist Buddhist teachings? They're not, because the Buddha didn't use koans, right? That came afterward.
Yeah, yeah.
So when did that all happen?
Well, it's interesting that there are koans from the time of the Buddha, like the Buddha twirling at the flower and Mahakasyapa smiling, but they weren't called koans then. And koan, actually, the word, it just means a public case, a public exchange. It's all the word actually means. And it kind of really became a thing in China, where they began to collect particular dialogues that seemed to have this capacity to kind of generate sort of a Dharma mind. So you read them and you go like, oh, and they kind of they capture the imagination. So they started to get kind of compiled in China. But stories from earlier in India are included in some of the collections. Yeah.
But is there a finite number of Buddhist koans, or?
No, there's like lots of different collections. They call different collections. So there's some particularly well-known collections, but there's many others. And of course, they're still being created. Like there's modern day koans and modern day collections. And time will tell which ones of those will live on for a longer time. Yeah, they're not they do come across as fairly mysterious, but actually they're just conversations that have happened. That's kind of all they are, but they just have a strength to them, because in the very small amount of words, there's a lot of meaning, or a lot of the teachings are just in the very small number of words. Like, you have misspoken. This whole Dharma talk is about how do we make the teachings our own, and the teacher expressed all of that just in those couple of words. And I always like to think that, even though in this particular koan it doesn't say that the monk was suddenly enlightened, but that the monk would have gone away and gone, why did the teacher say that to me? And might have really thought, I want to make these teachings my own somehow. And, and then that would have really been beneficial to that monk. Yeah.
Interesting to see whether modern minds do any better with modern koans than the ancient koans, because I struggle so much, and I just this would be an interesting exercise. I have to seek them out.
There's some modern koans in The Hidden Lamp, which is a collection of koans of women over the centuries. There's some contemporary ones in that collection, and some are a little more accessible than others, and you can understand what they're saying a little more easily. Like, I won't get the wording right, of course, but there's the story of the great teacher, I think she's called Mother Ma. You might know Lynn. And the story of, in San Francisco, a man's car gets broken into and his radio gets stolen, in the days when people had their radios stolen out of their cars. And it had happened repeatedly a number of times. And he expressed his upset about that to her. And she just sort of cuts in quite quickly and just expresses great compassion for the thief. And that's the koan, but of course, there it is, right there. We should be we should be able to imagine everybody's lives. We won't imagine them accurately, but we should compassionately try to imagine everybody's life, whatever they're doing, no matter how unskillful it is. We need to have a heart of compassion for every single person. So there's a koan just with that little dialogue, So that one's a little sort of easier to sort of see what the point is. And some of them are not so easy, like this one. It's probably not, it's a little bit baffling, probably. But I wanted to share it in a way that made it a little less baffling, hopefully, because that's what we want to do. We want to make the Dharma our own. Lynn.
One of the things that I really appreciate about koans is that I kind of think of them as family stories. And what I like about that is that, it's like sitting down listening to these kind of strange dreamlike stories that, as you say, after a while they become your own little, that may not be the whole thing, it may just be a line or whatever, but it's a way of embodying the ancestors. And to appreciate that there is an ancestral lineage from a particular, different culture or whatever. But and it has its own kind of I don't know, what is it, like its own kind of cultural style. So I just really appreciate that about koans, that it's not like a mindfulness practice that is separate from a whole history, but it's an embodied practice.
All right. Thank you for that. I think we can finish up. We'll do a little bit of chanting and some bowing.